All right, let's talk USC Trojans football. This is a team that obviously has had a very big offseason, whether it's through the transfer portal or recruiting or hires and additions they've made to this program and this coaching staff. The trend is undeniably USC's friend at this point. But when you make those big moves, those new additions, they still have to show up and they still have to be good players, good coaches, good leaders. They got to match the billing that they were brought in to do. And there's one USC freshman that's already off to an impressive start. This is a great sign for the Trojans. We'll get into it in just a second. But first, I'm Nick, that's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, like I said in the opening, then this USC Trojans team is definitely trending in the right direction. A lot of great additions, especially in the recruiting class. But there's one guy in particular that's off to a really great start that I think bodes very well for a key part of this USC team, and that, of course, is their defense. Let's pull up this report courtesy of SI.com. USC went all in during the winter transfer portal and with their 2025 recruiting class, which included five-star defensive lineman Jahkeem Stewart. The New Orleans native is expected to make an immediate impact in Dantonland's defense as a true freshman. USC coach Lincoln Riley had some lofty admiration for Stewart when he spoke about him. Jahkeem is someone that we targeted very early on. The tough thing was, so did everyone else. No kidding, he's a great player. Riley said, everyone sees the physical ability, the length, and he has a very unique combination physically. But I do think Jahkeem's mentality, the way he attacks, his confidence, he has a really gritty, tough, hardworking mentality. Love to see that. And I think that is what really makes him such an outstanding prospect and what made him a dominant high school player. We know Stewart was really talented, but I think Lincoln Riley's words here, I think, speak very highly in terms of what Stewart's mentality is going to be. And that is so important for any player, especially a big name recruit just like this. Miles, I know you got a few thoughts on this matter, but first, USC fans in the comment section below, we're talking Jahkeem Stewart, we're talking freshman for this Trojans program. What freshman outside of Stewart, obviously we're talking about him in this video, but what other freshmen are you really excited to see for this USC squad? Obviously, there's a lot of big names floating around, but give us one, just one freshman that you can't wait to see suit up for the Trojans this fall. Put them in the comment section below. But Miles, what are your thoughts on this latest news out of USC?
Yeah, Nick, I think this is fantastic news. Obviously, we've seen the reports. Jahkeem Stewart really put in the work in early. There's plenty of videos floating around the internet just showing his work ethic and practice. But for Lincoln Riley to come out and say, hey, this guy, like, of course, everybody wanted this guy. Everybody knows the physical tools. But when he came, he's got the mentality, he's got the ability to do all of these really great things. I think that's important. I think that's something that people don't give him enough credit for. And that's something that is very surprising, seeing as this guy was a 2026 class guy early. He reclassed, so he's younger than normal. This is a guy who came in early and just, you don't expect someone. We talk about guys all the time when we say, mature dudes. It's like guys who maybe, like a good example, Cam Ward, who played for the Miami Hurricanes last year, transferred around. Incarnate Word went around the block, Washington State, and then comes to Miami. He's been around the block, bounced school to school, got a lot of maturity under his belt. And so that's why they say this guy's mature. He's, able to come in, grind, be a hard worker, not too, outside of his britches. He's not really just anyone that's doing too much. Jahkeem Stewart, though, being so young, being a reclassification to the 2025 class, come in early, having all these lofty expectations, being a five-star recruit, everybody wanting him, and him coming in and just busting his butt, getting the head coach's recognition, saying this guy's gritty, determined. I love that. I think that means that they absolutely hit this out of the park. And it's important because, like you said, this was a big, big need for this Trojans team. There's just a year ago, we were talking about the Trojans saying, this is kind of like a question mark for them. Is this defensive line unit going to be an area of concern for USC? But now we're starting to see, with Jahkeem Stewart, I believe, leading the pack, that it's becoming a strength of this team. It's Eric Henderson came in and he did a fantastic job. Former Rams defensive line coach. They brought in two transfers, one from Kentucky, one from Georgia. They've got some guys returning to the team as well. Now the addition of Jahkeem Stewart, who's been doing really, really good. I think that this defensive line is going to show that it could be a big strength for the defense of the Trojans. That definitely has got to be the part that carries this team, because the offense, we know it's going to do its part, but there's going to be some heavy lifting done by this defense to contend and compete if they want to be college football playoff contenders. Jahkeem Stewart showing he can be one of those guys, and he's kind of spearheading the turnaround of this defensive line for the Trojans. I think it's really good news, and I'd be very excited so far for Trojans fans.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I think it's important that to understand that there are certain recruits on every program, and it's not every guy on every class. There are some classes where there are none that I call like sort of tent pole guys, guys that are like going to be the foundation of your football team and future recruiting and future transfers for years to come. These guys usually have multiple characteristics. Number one, they're a big name, big talented guy, like five-star recruit kind of thing, right? Number two, they're not local, right? They're national names or national prospects, which of course is the case with when it comes to Jahkeem Stewart. Number three, they're on a team where it's a position of need, right? If you're a five-star quarterback, this is where, like, for example, Arch Manning doesn't work for Texas a couple of years ago. They already had yours, right? So it didn't really fall for this case. But the USC defense obviously has a big need at defensive line. And number four, they have the right mentality. They have that grinder, gritty work ethic mentality. Guys that hit all four of those boxes tend to be, again, those tent pole recruits that get off to great starts and they turn programs around. They come in and they galvanize the upperclassmen because they see a freshman come in, especially a kid who reclassified, working so hard and doing so many good things that suddenly they got to step up their game. They got to get on his level. It energizes the other freshmen around him and the new transfers around him saying, hey, listen, we got to keep up with Stewart, man. He's new on this program just like us and he's kicking butt. We got to step up our game. We got to put in the work like he does. And it also shows future transfers and future recruits that, hey, listen, if I want to play and contribute, I just got to be good enough and work hard enough, and I'll get on the field right away. Because after all, that's what Jahkeem Stewart did. This is the kind of recruits that change entire sides of the football. The most famous example, I think, in college football history is the Tim Tebow effect down in Florida a number of years ago. Of course, Urban Meyer, part of that, the head coach of that Florida Gators team, he had that same kind of effect. Remember, he played some as a freshman, but he was not the starting quarterback, but he galvanized the entire Florida Gators program, got it headed in the right direction, ended up being massive for Florida recruiting, so much so that I think Florida just got used to recruiting at such a high level that they took a while for them to recover. I think only recently are they started getting back to that high recruiting ranks they were. That's how powerful the Tim Tebow effect was. Now, I'm not saying Stewart's going to be on Tebow's level, of course, because Tebow being the quarterback and everything about him, completely different ball game. But there are guys, there are recruits that are tent poles that have the ability to change entire programs, entire sides of the football. And Jahkeem Stewart, so far, look, I know it's early. It's we're talking March, right? It's not like he's been there only a couple months, right? We're not a huge amount of time under the belt for Jahkeem Stewart with USC. But so far, he's doing everything right. And we talk about it all the time on this channel. Players that get off to good starts when it comes to January, February, March, they usually carry that into summer and they carry that into training camp and they carry that in the fall and then their career gets off to good starts and it snowballs from there, right? Getting off to a good start is always so important, especially for these five-star guys. Again, you're talking about a key part of your program. To me, this is just really important. USC invested a lot of time and effort, a lot of dollars to secure Jahkeem Stewart. He is not only coming in and being the bare minimum of what they wanted talent wise, he's exceeding it, but his mentality is just off the charts. And Miles, now I'll throw a question at you. When you look at Jahkeem Stewart and his mentality, if you're in this locker room, if you're on this USC team, obviously you're trying to figure out quarterback of the future, trying to a lot of question marks overall. Do you see Jahkeem Stewart as maybe the future leader of this team going forward, or do you think he's just maybe just a guy just to get momentum going in the right direction? What do you think of Jahkeem Stewart in terms of just his role on this football team outside of just being a great defensive player?
Yeah, I definitely see him as a future leader of this team because it already seems like you say tentpole type guy, I say guy that comes in, lead by example. That's when I think when of someone like that already putting the work in, already showing he's that gritty, like hardworking type of player. That's early on. That's who you want to see, and it's a little bit different because for a defensive lineman, they're not necessarily going to come in as a freshman and you expect them to be like a mouthpiece, like a vocal leader. It could be the case, but usually if it was a quarterback, you would expect that. Like you expect young quarterbacks to come into teams and already be like vocal leaders, show that they can take command, take charge of the team. But a defensive lineman, he doesn't have to do that. So you don't necessarily need to see that early on. But just everything we've seen, just the small details. And already one thing that I think people don't give enough credit for, these young kids moving all the way across the country. This guy is coming from Louisiana to the West Coast. If on three's numbers are correct, he's moving 1,669 miles away from where he originally was. That's pretty far. So for him to come over, be that far away from home, everyone knows when you move off to college, the transition. There's a lot going on, a lot to get used to. West Coast Southern California, a lot different than Louisiana. There's a big transition going on. A lot of things that could distract you out there as well. But all we're hearing about is how much work this guy's putting in, how hard he's working, and how great of a, teammate, how good he's been so far. I think that shows that this guy has shown everything that he needs to early on to be, like you said, I think he is the future leader of this team. I really like what we're seeing of Jahkeem Stewart. We got to see his play on the field, but early on, every indication that he could be exactly what you're naming there.
And they need him to be, right, even just performance on the field. Because, right, you're looking at a USC team last year defensively in the Big Ten, far from good, obviously. They gave up the fourth most yards and the seventh most points in the entire Big Ten, which is not a good thing, of course. This is a defense that was terrible 2 years ago. It was maybe a little bit better if you really squinted and looked hard last year. I think there were a few bright spots, but it really needs to take the big leap in 2025. And Jahkeem Stewart's going to be a big part of that. A lot of pressure on him. One of the great reasons why I love to see him, he's a hardworking, gritty guy. Because when you're a rebuilding kind of defense, there's going to be games where you give up 40 points. It's just going to happen. There's going to be a half where you give up 28 or something like that. It's how can you recover from that? Hard work, toughness, perseverance, mental acuity, mental toughness. That makes all the difference to move on from a bad quarter, bad half, bad game, and not have the USC debacle where their defense looks to be playing better. They give up a 40 burger, and then it all falls apart the rest of the year. I feel like that's what we've seen from USC the past couple of years. The mentality of Jahkeem Stewart, his growing leadership, and of course his incredible talent should really help the USC Trojans defense avoid those kind of disasters and really become, as they should be, one of the better units in their conference.